Hey there, internet friends, and welcome to That D Plus Show. Class is in session for the only show from that nerdy site that lets you know what kind of quality to expect right from the name. I'm your host, Trevor Starkey, and each week we dive into a different Disney Plus offering and discuss its history, how it holds up today, and our general impressions on the film or TV show or whatever the case may be. This show is made possible entirely by the support of our patrons over at patreon.com/thatnerdysite. If you like the show and you can support us over there, we would definitely appreciate it, but if you can't, no big deal. The fact that you're listening is awesome, and of course, we would love it if you like, subscribe, rate, review, and share the podcast with your friends. Another solo episode this week. I want to thank Logan for joining me last week to discuss Hocus Pocus. And we're still hoping to maybe do Halloween Town for next week's episode, but he wasn't going to be able to sit down and rewatch it in between. So rather than do a solo episode on Halloween Town, I sat down and looked for something to watch, and I chose Frankenweenie. That's what this week's episode is going to be all about. This is the Tim Burton animated film. I basically sat down and wanted to kind of keep in the Halloween theme of things here in October, and kind of looked at Disney Plus as like, here's Halloween movies to watch, and this one seemed like the least... I didn't want to watch Twitches, I guess is where I'm going. I didn't want to watch without having somebody else to discuss them with. I didn't want to watch one of the other, Disney Channel original movie Halloween things. And then the other, obviously, front runner would be, something like Nightmare Before Christmas. But that's one that I feel like I could find people to discuss that movie, and so I will save that one for when I have guests to come on and do it, and maybe that will be, as I kind of suggested last week during the Hocus Pocus, I view that more as a Christmas movie anyway, so maybe we'll do that here in the coming months, and I'll get somebody to come on and discuss that one with me. But, so, looking at Halloween stuff, Frankenweenie came up there, and I was like, you know what, I never saw that, let's give that one a shot. It's like a 90-minute movie, I'll sit down and watch that one, so... Let's dive into a little bit of the history lesson on Frankenweenie. This was an animated film originally released October 5th, 2012. Other notable releases of the time, you had a couple weeks earlier, Perks of Being a Wallflower had come out on September 21st. The week before this one, Hotel Transylvania came out on September 28th, the Adam Sandler Dracula animated film, which has continued on and spawned a couple sequels to date. This came out the same day as the original Pitch Perfect film. A couple weeks later, on October 19th, we would see the fourth installment of the Paranormal Activity series, Paranormal Activity 4. And then at the end of October, October 26th of 2012 there, is when James Bond's Skyfall came out. So... just kind of putting it in the context of the world and other movies that kind of came out around this time. Obviously, of those, Hotel Transylvania being the other animated, targeted at kids movie, was certainly its biggest competitor there at the box office. And I'm pretty sure Hotel Transylvania won out at the end of the day. Runtime of an hour and 28 minutes. And in the Disney timeline of things, this came in between the Pixar film Brave that had come out in June 22nd of 2012 there, and Wreck-It Ralph came out November 2nd, so about a month after this movie is when Wreck-It Ralph hit from Disney Animated Studios. As for the roll call, of course, the director here, we have Tim Burton. No surprise there. The thing that did surprise me, and I didn't catch this because I didn't do kind of the document here that I kind of pulled together with all this history and stuff. The thing I didn't notice know about until after the kind of credits were rolling is that Tim Burton originally did a live-action short film called Frankenweenie back in 1984 with Disney. It features it was basically like his last little thing before I think he broke out to kind of more mainstream success with Pee-wee's Big Adventure in 1985. And Frankenweenie, the live-action version, features Shelley Duvall, it features Daniel Stern, and it features the kid from Neverending Story, which also came out in 1984. So that kid was basically kind of at the height of his powers, I guess. And yeah, I sat down. I'll talk about it a little bit kind of later, but I did. After watching this, I was like, I'm curious what that live-action version from 25, 30, 35 years ago looks like and feels like. So I sat down and watched that as well. But the brunt of this is going to be about the animated Frankenweenie. But in addition to that, of course, as I said, Tim Burton has also directed Pee-wee's Big Adventure, Beetlejuice, the 1989 Batman. He was not the director of Tim Burton's The Nightmare Before Christmas. That is a common misconception. He's a producer of it, and he did kind of like come up with the concept and characters for it. He also directed Mars Attacks, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Corpse Bride, Alice in Wonderland, and most recently for Disney, he directed the live-action Dumbo from last year, which I keep forgetting was a thing that actually happened last year, because that just kind of came and went. The writers for this film, you have Leonard Rips, who was kind of the writer of the original 1984 version, the screenplay of that, who was a credited writer on this. And this might be my favorite discovery in any of this. Leonard Rips, apparently one of his other credits on IMDb, he was also a writer of the Star Wars Holiday Special back in 1978. So he worked on that much maligned piece of pop culture kind of history. As I said, he also did the 1984 version of Frankenweenie, and then he was mostly a TV writer outside of that. He did notably 17 episodes of Full House. That showed up in his IMDb. Tim Burton, credited here for the, quote, original idea, had done, obviously, the 1984 Frankenweenie, and then he was also the writer of Edward Scissorhands. He did write, or at least kind of come up with the stories and character for The Nightmare Before Christmas. He came up with the characters for Corpse Bride, and he's not too much of a script writer, but he is a kind of concept artist, and then he brings in this next person to do a lot of his collaboration and a lot of the screenplays. And that is John August, who, prior to kind of starting to collaborate with Tim Burton, had written Titan A.E., as well as the early 2000s, I think, Charlie's Angels movies, Charlie's Angels and Charlie's Angels Full Throttle. And then he started getting kind of collaborating with Tim Burton here around the time of Big Fish, and then would go on and continue collaborations with Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Corpse Bride, Dark Shadows, and then unrelated to Tim Burton, but he is a credited writer on 2019's Aladdin, which is, if you're unfamiliar, like the 2019 Aladdin is mostly the script of the 1993 animated Aladdin, but because of Writers Guild of America rules, I believe, kind of the new people that came in and added a little bit of stuff to it are the ones who are the credited writers for the 2019 version, whereas the original writers through the Animation Guild, I believe, are credited in a lesser capacity, and they're not credited as like the screenplay writers for the later version, which is weird and dumb, but whatever. Anyway, in terms of the starring here, you have Catherine O'Hara here playing Mrs. Frankenstein, as well as Weird Girl and the gym teacher. Of course, she kind of got her start working with Tim Burton back at Beetlejuice, and very much a staple of my childhood in the Home Alone films, as Kevin McAllister's mother. She was also, I didn't realize this because it's not one of my kind of like fortes, but she was the voice of Sally there in Nightmare Before Christmas. But I know her best certainly for Waiting for Guffman, Best in Show, A Mighty Wind, that kind of Christopher Guest mockumentary style of things. She was also in, following this, she has been in a series of Unfortunate Events on the Netflix version. And then, of course, she most recently has been involved in doing Schitt's Creek, which she just won the Emmy for this last year. Martin Short plays Mr. Frankenstein, as well as Mr. Burgermeister and Nassau. He, of course, kind of came to prominence. He was a comic of the 70s and 80s, predominantly, but he kind of came to prominence, rose to prominence alongside Chevy Chase and Steve Martin in Three Amigos, and has, been a staple character performer in that he creates these characters like Ed Grimley, like Jiminy Glick, and so that's kind of like where a lot of his bread and butter has done, and occasionally those characters transcend his stand-up shows and stuff like that and have made their way onto Saturday Night Live, Primetime Glick, and various other things. He's also in Father of the Bride and The Santa Claus 3, The Escape Clause, as well as the short-lived sitcom Mulaney by John Mulaney. He was kind of the effectively like the Kramer type character of that series, I believe. And then recently he was also in Hairspray Live when one of the kind of basic channels did that one. Martin Landau here plays Mr. Rizkrewski, who is the science teacher in this film, known best for North by Northwest, as well as the original Mission Impossible TV series. And then he was, I believe, nominated for Academy Awards for his work in Crimes and Misdemeanors. And then I believe he won the Academy Award for his work with Tim Burton on Ed Wood. So shout out to Martin Landau, who unfortunately passed in 2017. Charlie Tahan plays Victor here, the child, who prior to this had done I Am Legend, and then since Frankenweenie, he was the role of Scarecrow or Jonathan Crane on Gotham for a handful of episodes, and then currently he can be seen on the, I want to say, Netflix series Ozark, so you can check him out there. Winona Ryder is in here as Elsa. Of course, again, an alumni of Tim Burton's from all the way back to Beetlejuice and Edward Scissorhands. She also would go on to do Heathers, Little Women, The Crucible, which I had forgotten she was in that, but I remember having to watch that back in high school. And then she was, prior to this, she was weirdly cast in the Star Trek reboot as Spock's mother in a role that seems like it was probably originally designed to be something bigger and maybe got like left on the cutting room floor. But of course, she has kind of had a resurgence in recent years as the mother on Stranger Things. So you can check that out. And then I want to give a shout out to Frank Welker as Sparky the dog, who has 850 plus credits on IMDb. He is probably most animals you would think of in a lot of cartoons and animated work. But in addition to kind of that like catch-all work that he does, he is also, of course, the voice of Scooby-Doo, as well as the voice of Nibbler from Futurama. He was a Boo in Aladdin, since that came up earlier. And then for the fans of the 80s Transformers series, he was Megatron and Galvatron in Transformers, and has since come back and played I think Soundwave and a couple characters in the Michael Bay films. A little bit of trivia on the film. The Pet Cemetery features the grave of Zero from The Nightmare Before Christmas, which leads to a lot of like speculation that Nightmare Before Christmas and Frankenweenie and Corpse Bride all exist in the same quote cinematic universe and are relatives of one another, hundreds of years apart or something like that. Hasn't really ever been confirmed or something. I think it's just an Easter egg that they threw in, kind of the Zero grave from Night Before Christmas into this film. But Shelley is named for the pet in this film. Shelley is, of course, named for Mary Shelley, the originator of the Frankenstein story, which she famously did as a bet. The demonstration that Mr. Rizkrewski shows in class of the frog's legs twitching when given electricity is based on actual experiments in 1771 by Italian physicist Luigi Galvani, who was the first to discover that the legs of dead frogs and other dead creatures twitched and moved when sparked by electricity. This led to the study of bioelectricity and further study of the nervous system and its functions. The study of galvanic effects in biology is named after Galvani, who is seen as the discoverer of bioelectricity. Several of Tim Burton's movies have played with this theme, most notably Frankenweenie and Edward Scissorhands from 1990. Mr. Rizkrewski is directly modeled on Martin Landau, whose character is voiced by Landau. Not only was Martin right for the part, but he has appeared in a number of previous Burton films, including Ed Wood, for which he won an Oscar for Best Supporting Actor, as I mentioned earlier. Other films, this has a ton of nods to kind of like horror iconography over the years, including Nosferatu, Frankenstein, obviously, The Mummy, Bride of Frankenstein in Persephone the dog there, Godzilla, obviously, in Shelley, the sea monkeys are reminiscent of gremlins. Obviously, there's a whole element of kind of Stephen King's Pet Sematary notion to this. Batman is also referenced in here when the cat turns into like the gargoyle thing. It kind of has like a moment there where it's a bat cat effectively and kind of does the bat symbol thing. And then Edward Scissorhands gets a little nod when Mr. Burgermeister is trimming the hedges outside of the Frankenstein household. So how does this movie hold up? I have never particularly been a huge fan of Tim Burton's work. Like, his aesthetic just isn't something that really kind of connects with me, specifically and especially here on the animated side of things. Like the design of his animated characters, going back to Nightmare Before Christmas, into Frankenweenie and Corpse Bride here, are just like, I don't like the intentionally kind of grotesque look that they go for, with like the eyes always very sunken in and just kind of like the black around the eyes and stuff. Just doesn't appeal to me. It's like, it is definitely a stylistic choice, but it's not one that I find any kind of like pleasure or joy or anything in. And so yeah, like, Tim Burton is a very missing, like, it's not a flavor that strikes with me. In this film in particular, I found myself thinking a lot of things were like weirdly outdated, even for 2012 when this would have come out. And they work even less so now in 2020. But it ended up like, my first thought when I saw this is based on a 1984 thing that he had done, was kind of like, I feel like a lot of the ideas maybe were still like left from 1984. Having watched the Frankenweenie live action thing, not quite what I was thinking, but like the biggest example that I think of is the idea, the character in this film, who is it? Toshiaki, the Japanese child, like, is off-puttingly like a token Japanese kind of character, like a token Japanese student. And it felt very weird that like it wasn't explained or justified or any kind of thing as to like why this kid is speaking with the very stereotypical Japanese accent. And, you know, to Tim Burton's credit, they had an Asian American actor kind of performing the role, so maybe that's just how he spoke. I don't know. But it felt weird to set this kid apart that much in this film without really kind of giving any explanation for it, until the Shelley reveal happens and it becomes a very obvious, Godzilla thing. And that's like, okay, well, that clearly makes sense now, I guess, but still feels like the kid didn't need to be that much of a stereotypical Japanese caricature in my estimation. Obviously, as speaking as a white guy, what do I know? Maybe that is more true and maybe isn't as offensive as it kind of came across to me. But it definitely like left me unsettled here in 2020, and like thinking back, I was like, and like 2012, like the idea of the Japanese kind of stereotype of characters, and not that this one necessarily does that, but it almost kind of like it threads that needle a little bit, of the Japanese character that kind of like says the L's and the R's kind of reversed. The Mickey Rooney effect is kind of how I described it to my mom when I was talking to her about this today. Shout out to my mom, who may eventually be listening to this episode and has already heard some of my grievances on the film. But the like Mickey Rooney obviously is a terrible Japanese caricature in Breakfast at Tiffany's, and there were elements of this character here in Frankenweenie that felt almost like a callback to that style of kind of like Japanese exploitation a little bit, that left me here in 2020, definitely kind of discomforted by the thing. It certainly, again, made more sense when Shelley gets mixed in with the Miracle Grower or whatever, and turns into a very kind of Godzilla-type character. But even that is playing off of Godzilla and Japanese stereotypes in a sense. So there were a couple things like that just felt out of time, out of place in this film. Here, especially here in 2020, but felt like they were probably still already out of place back in 2012. Another example that I kind of mentioned is there's a joke in the film about the dad is a travel agent or whatever, and deals with kind of husbands and wives having to compromise all the time. Talks about this joke about the dad wants to go play golf in Scotland, and the mom wants to go trekking through the Amazon. So he sends them to Scottsdale, Arizona, where the dad can golf and the mom still gets Indians. And while I will always, have a little smirk on my face on a Scottsdale, Arizona joke as somebody who has grown up and lived here my entire life, like the idea, the punchline of that joke being, part like the golf part. Absolutely, we have a ridiculous amount of golf courses out here, but Amazon natives wouldn't be Indians in the first place, and B, we haven't been it hasn't been PC to call them Indians for many, many years. That's not like a post 2012 thing, Native Americans and that kind of terminology. So it just even that was there's weird racial undertones in this film that feel uncomfortably out of place. So in terms of it holding up, I don't think it does. And then the other major aspect of the film is I can't imagine this found an audience, because as a children's movie, what child is looking to get the Frankenstein story where they have to deal with the trauma of a dog dying? It's not going to connect, and you're going to get the sadness of Bambi then turned into a weird Frankenstein story, a weird little pseudo horror story. So yeah, it was weird. I'm not a fan of the film. It's not terrible, but it just doesn't appeal to me. It's not something that I don't think I ever would have enjoyed it as a child or something like that. So yeah, it felt weird, felt out of place, and yeah, I don't think it holds up part of it is I don't know just how much of it is just my disinterest and distaste for Tim Burton, that kind of his style and his aesthetic, kind of bleeding into this. But yeah, it's certainly not something that I needed to really enjoy or watch or something, and it's not something I won't sit down and really watch again. That all said, weirdly, going back and watching the 1984 version, in its abbreviated format, because it's about a 30-minute short film. So it definitely, I actually enjoyed that version better and more, because they both start out with the same kind of little, Victor is an aspiring filmmaker, clearly a stand-in for Tim Burton there, where Victor has cast Sparky as the lead in his little made from home movie, and both of them start out with the same kind of home movie feel, and in the live action version, Sparky then they finish playing the movie and then they go out and play catch, and Sparky is dead before the credits roll, the ball rolls out into the street and Sparky gets hit by a car, and then cut to credits. And you kind of get the opening sequence or whatever. In the animated version, there's a much more drawn out kind of story introducing the students at school and all this kind of stuff. And Victor playing baseball, and you still end up getting to the same place, and it's the end of the first act or whatever. But in the live action version, that happens in 2 minutes, and it's 20 minutes in the animated film. And then again, there are a lot of direct visual callbacks to this live action version in the animated film, that were interesting to see, kind of in the order that I watched them in. And it doesn't go into that second act thing of the animated film where all of the other kids come up with and create, life out of their pets or anything like that. The live action version just kind of skips over all that and gets straight to like there's a sequence where Sparky kind of gets out in the neighborhood and people are freaking out about it, and then it pretty much goes straight to the windmill end scene where Sparky saves the day, and then the whole town kind of gets behind the idea of letting Sparky live again, kind of thing. So it just in its abbreviated format, I appreciated the live action version better as a result of it. I think it worked better visually as a live action black and white kind of thing compared to the animated black and white style that the animated Frankenweenie has. So yeah, weirdly, like I hadn't anticipated kind of doing both Frankenweenies in this kind of conversation, but yeah, I think the live action one is like, watch that one if you're gonna watch any of them, and then if you're like, yeah, that was fun, I'd be interested in like a longer version of that that adds a couple subplot points, then sure, you can go and watch the animated one. But for me, didn't really. I definitely would have been fine not watching the animated version at the end of the day, because yeah, just not my cup of tea. So at the end of the day, yeah, I give this I give it a C. It's by no means badly done. The stop motion animation is wonderful, as it often is, as a style of animation, and I'm sure a ton of work was put into it to make it the way it was and have it perform the way it was. It's just not my cup of tea in terms of story. There's also the weird, one of the first things I jotted down in terms of notes was the little thing that popped up of based on an original idea by Tim Burton. I'm like, all right, well, I feel like Mary Shelley would have some words with your original idea there, Tim Burton. But I kind of ate those words a little bit when I discovered that, oh, he did have this idea in 1984 too. So it's maybe that's the original idea that this film was based on. But again, it's still not an original idea because the Frankenstein story has been around for many, many years. So yeah, just kind of a weird, based on an adaptation would have been a better appropriate thing. But again, like with the Aladdin stuff, maybe that came down to contracts and lawyers and unions saying how he had to be credited for something like that. Anyway, so yeah, I give it a C. It's it's not terrible. It's just not my cup of tea, and it's well done. In terms of extra credit, the other suggestions that Disney Plus has here, the first one there was, as I said, the 1984 short of Disney's Frankenweenie, which again has Shelley Duvall in there as the mom. It has Daniel Stern as the dad, and then it has the boy from the Neverending Story as Victor Frankenstein there. So yeah, shout out to that, as a fun little thing that, because Tim Burton had worked on that years before. Oh, and that was another little fun trivia thing. He apparently got fired from that project, because again, this is before he was a name, but he got fired from it because Disney kind of thought he was wasting money on the Frankenweenie project. So still got released in some form or other, but yeah, the idea that Tim Burton may have had bad blood with Disney at some point, but then obviously came back and regained their favor by the time Nightmare Before Christmas rolled around. He was, maybe ahead of his time or whatever. And then obviously he has made them millions upon millions of dollars with specifically the Alice in Wonderland live action movies since then. So anyway, other extra credit suggestions. Captain Sparky versus the Flying Saucers is like a little 2-minute, pre-movie animated short featuring Frankenstein and Sparky and that kind of stuff. So you can go check that out. James and the Giant Peach, which also is weirdly classified in their Halloween category of things. And I'm like, I don't remember James and the Giant Peach being Halloweeny, but okay. The Nightmare Before Christmas, of course. Alice in Wonderland, the live action. Dumbo, the live action. Again, both of those making sense because Tim Burton directed them. The Cat from Outer Space looked like one of those older Disney movies from the 70s or 80s. I didn't really know anything about it. And then Zombies, high school zombies thing, Disney Channel original movie, whatever that one's about. And then I also want to give a little shout out to it's not one of these suggested things on Disney Plus there, but it is in the extras on Disney Frankenweenie itself. Called Miniatures in Motion, Bringing Frankenweenie to Life. It's a little 23-minute extra there, kind of a documentary behind-the-scenes look at doing the stop-motion animation for the film. So check all of that out if you are so inclined, if you like Frankenweenie and want to have some extra fun there. In terms of extracurriculars, the other thing I really watched was sitting down and watching the 1984 Frankenweenie to see how that played out. So yeah, it's been a busy Frankenweenie couple of days for me here. That's going to do it for this week's episode of That D Plus Show. Thank you for joining me. You can follow me at Trevor J. Starkey on Twitter. You can go check out all the stuff we're doing over at That Nerdy Site, at That Nerdy Site, or thatnerdysite.com. If you liked what you heard, once again, please like, rate, review, subscribe, share the podcast with your friends, and all that fun stuff. And if you do feel so inclined, you can always help support us on Patreon at patreon.com/thatnerdysite. Really comes in handy, especially as we're about to hit our 1-year anniversary here on November 1st. We appreciate all the support we've gotten this last year. So thank you again for joining me. As always, stay nerdy, be good to each other, and class dismissed.